Welcome, everybody. Just waiting for a few more people to pop in, but I think I'm good to get started. Uh, so first of all, we have come to the end of the Sara Turnbull Designer Speaker Series, not just for the semester, even though this is the last talk in the semester, but it's also for the whole series. So before launching into today, I just want to take a brief moment to express my gratitude over the past 4.5 years, which is easy to say, but it's hard to sort of conceptualize. But over that time, the series has provided a pretty great platform for me to engage in formal and then sometimes informal discussions about design and art and science and philosophy. And it's brought together some of the most inspiring artists, designers, and thinkers in the field. People on my wish list, right? So it's just been incredible to talk to everybody. So first of all, I'm immensely thankful to Dorothy Dunn, Dee, to her friends at the Turnbull Foundation. She's here today, I see. So welcome. And just everybody at the Turnbull Foundation for their unwavering support of Lehman College and for granting me the freedom to explore these topics and these ideas, and sometimes to kind of go off topic and talk about other stuff. It's been great. I also want to extend my gratitude to Bart Bland. He's the director of the Lehman College Art Gallery, for his invaluable assistance behind the scenes, as well as to that same point, Deborah Yuzinski and Ashley Lum, both in the art gallery. They all kind of make it work in the behind the scenes from the paperwork perspective. And of course the Lehman Foundation, because they are also part of the grease in the wheel of the system. And lastly, a special thanks just goes out to each and every speaker who I've met with over the years and shared insights and experiences. Your contributions have really enriched Lehman's continuing discussion about design, and they've inspired not just me, but more importantly, our students to think creatively and to ask critical questions about design. I think that's just been phenomenal to have that kind of what I call a living textbook. And I guess I also want to thank the students, all of them who are joining us today and who have been joined us in the past. Unfortunately, our guest couldn't join us live today because he had an unexpected meeting with actually who's his first client, which is just checking my notes. Oh yeah, Pink Floyd. But he never heard of him. But he graciously agreed to meet with our class informally later this semester, which I actually think is a little bit better. He was expressing that he would like to really just meet with a class, whether physically or remotely. And I think this will be better because he'll be able to see students, talk with them. In the webinar format, that's not really possible. So I think it's going to be even better this way. But in the meantime, I'm excited to share with you the pre-recorded discussion that I had with Aubrey Powell. He's founder of Hipgnosis Design, co-founder, I should say. And if you have any questions during the presentation, as usual, please feel free to submit them into the Q&A module, and I'll just pass them on to Aubrey at the close of this presentation. So again, lastly, thank you all for joining me these past years. Your support and participation have been truly appreciated. So with no further ado, on with the show. So just stand by. I'm just going to get this queued up here. Okay. Hi there, and welcome to the 6th and final installment of the spring 2024 Sara Turnbull Visiting Designer Speaker Series. If you've been following along, you know this semester we've been exploring what's turned out to be pretty fascinating, which is the world of packaging design. Never thought it would be this interesting, but also packaging's impact on our perceptions, our experiences, our identities. And today we're going to take, again, a slightly different approach or look at packaging today by looking at, among other things, record album art, and specifically how it's kind of outlived the album as a cultural form, and it has itself become high art. Excuse me. Album art has had a huge role in my life, but it's long been recognized as a pretty powerful form of visual expression It shapes our interpretation of the music, and it reflects cultural trends depending on which decade you're in. An iconic album cover is certainly part of what makes an album legendary, and it has this ability to captivate, inspire us, provoke thought. And it's usually my experience is that all those things kind of happen on the way home after buying the record or buying the album. Kind of like you're reading the liner notes, and you're looking at the art, and you're imagining what you're hearing, and it's just like a pretty important angle that I think we're kind of largely missing today in the age of Spotify and Pandora. But our guest today is Aubrey Powell, co-founder of the legendary design firm Hipgnosis, along with Storm Thorgrenson. Aubrey and Storm co-founded Hipgnosis in the late 1960s. Their creative vision and innovative approach to design quickly propelled Hipgnosis to international acclaim, earning them a reputation as pioneers in the field of album art. In 1968, Aubrey produced his first album cover with Hipgnosis for Pink Floyd's A Saucer Full of Secrets alongside Storm. This marked the beginning of Hipgnosis's legendary portfolio, which now includes iconic covers for artists such as Paul McCartney, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, Yes, T-Rex. I just recently found out, by the way, I love that album. Def Leppard, AC/DC, Genesis, Peter Gabriel, Electric Light Orchestra, Styx. I mean, I could go on, but it's, you can Google the rest. It's pretty impressive. It turns out he's much more than a graphic designer. Beyond album art, Aubrey has made pretty significant contributions to filmmaking, directing, documentary, music videos. Owner of a Lonely Heart, for example. I was just rewatching, by the way, today. It's amazing. And feature films. He's also served as creative director for the Paul McCartney World Tour, designing stage sets and directing documentaries. This is all a testament, I think, to the fact that when you're talking about design, Aubrey really represents where design is literally everywhere, from stage design to production design to album cover design. It's the type design. I mean, it's really, and of course, Aubrey is a photographer, so photography plays a part. It really shows how design is sort of suffuse in all of the arts. So please join me in welcoming Aubrey Powell as he shares insights into the art of album packaging, the creative process behind some of the most memorable album covers in history, and his journey as a visionary designer. Aubrey, thank you so much for being here and talking to us.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here today. And we're going to talk about packaging. Album covers, I suppose people don't really think of packaging like you do with boxes and sort of FedEx packages you might receive and stuff like that, or perfume packaging. But of course, album covers are. I mean, they're made of cardboard and they contain a vinyl record. And in the 1970s, particularly, it was a very important genre because they sold in tens of millions. And this was way before the time of Spotify, YouTube, any of that stuff, anything digital. And so it was an important thing to have for a band. It was an asset to a band. It was a signpost which sort of showed where they were at the time in terms of their music, their style, their influence, whatever. Because there wasn't much else. There was probably 2 or 3 music papers around. There was probably a couple of rock shows on TV, but that was about it. And so album cover became a cultural kind of icon for any fan or any purchaser to understand a little bit more about their favorite music. It was as simple as that. Now, there is a revival going on with vinyl. For many years, it was completely disregarded and put out with the trash. But suddenly it's back. I think if you go to any reasonable store, you'll find record players for sale. You'll find vinyl being reissued. All the major artists, certainly, and I include Taylor Swift, Beyonce, right down to the rock and roll bands that I worked for in the 70s, like Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, people like that. They're all issuing vinyl. It's popular again. And I think probably that started with hip hop and people using the decks and stuff like that. People became aware of this piece of flexible plastic that you could use. So interestingly enough, vinyl probably is outselling many of the previous forms that we've seen in recent years. So that's very pleasing. However, in terms of packaging, it's not so great because actually there's not so many records being sold anymore. The budgets are very low, and most people see a little tiny picture on Spotify or artists they're purchasing, and the visual art that goes along with the music has definitely decreased. I would say it's not as important as it was culturally and socially as it was between 1968 and 1982. Those 14 years were the halcyon days.
So tell us about this. Is our Crumb here I'm looking at. Tell us about this.
So Art Crumb, he was a wonderful illustrator who was around in San Francisco in the 1960s. And he did a lot of illustrations for comics, but he also did one or two album covers for people like Janis Joplin and stuff like that. And the reason I've chosen this picture is because the stuff that dreams are made of, here we have a man obsessed by his record collection, and he's completely freaking out. And it says, "The Dead Sea Scrolls of Record Collecting." And to be honest, in the 1970s, record collecting was a very important part of your social fabric. You know, when you went into a store and you bought a record, you came out with it and you put it at home on your shelf. It kind of told people what sort of person you were. If you bought a Bob Dylan record and it was on the shelf, then you were a folkie. If you bought AC/DC, you were a rocker. If you Pink Floyd, you were into progressive music, you know, so it became a social symbol in a way. And people started buying collections. Now, one thing I would like to say, I'm just going to move on to another picture with this, which is, it's not working. Sorry, it's not moving.
Oh yeah, no problem. Okay. Here, can you maybe mouse over to the or click over to the there you go.
Okay. So for my own part in this album cover design for packaging, my fortunes changed in 1973, right in the heydays of album cover design, when I designed an album cover called Dark Side of the Moon for Pink Floyd. And I like to think that this helped sell the album. Probably they would argue, well, we sold 65 million without you based on our music. However, the one thing I will say about this image is that there's a graphic, and it is a very simple graphic. It's almost like a perfume box graphic or a chocolate box graphic. But it stood the test of time. And 50 years later, you walk down any high street in any city in the world, and you'll find it on somebody's T-shirt within 5 minutes, which is very pleasing for me. But nevertheless, it means that album cover design that was done for packaging in the 1970s has become acceptable not only on a social level, but on a museum level as well. It's now become recognized as serious fine art. And you know, that's how I started. And with that intention in mind. So I kind of feel that it's important for us to look back and see a little bit how these things worked. Now, here you see what I would call the classic record collector's emporium. This is a store in the 1970s on a Saturday afternoon when people went to buy a record. Well, nowadays, you want to buy a record, you just simply switch on to Spotify or YouTube or whatever, and you can just download it, and that's it. What? Not so easy then. You walked into a large place like Tower Records, there would be 10,000 albums in there. So the object of good packaging in those days was to create an image that would stand out from everything else.
Yeah.
And that could make a big difference to the sale of an album. So I kind of feel that it was also a tactile experience. So when you got your album and you took it home and you took it out of the package and you put it on the record player, there was something very delicate. It was almost like a Holy Communion, where you put the needle onto the record, it made this kind of scratchy sound, then the music started. And when you see that record going round in a sort of mesmeric way, it was something which connected with you, which you don't have now with a digital experience.
No, it's also, I remember I grew up with vinyl. Like my dad had a huge vinyl collection. He didn't have very cool albums, but he had a lot of, he had like Herb Alpert, the stuff that everybody had. But
Right.
But he also had, some interesting things. But I remember, because the vinyl is tactile and you have to interact with it, you're not only initiating the music and interacting with it, you're feeling it like in your fingertips. Even you can kind of like feel it moving and feel it vibrating. And I remember waiting in line at record stores in the 90s, right? Like it was such an exciting thing that you can't do nowadays. But like with the CD, even though they have album art and even though they have liner notes, you don't have like a tactile experience. In fact, you were disabused from actually touching the discs, right? They were very fragile things. So I think you're on to something here, that vinyl, there's something about the physicality of vinyl that we really lost. And also like the limit of time that a vinyl record had. It was like just about an hour, right? I mean, it's another.
Right. It was generally 42 minutes.
Yeah, okay. The LPs, yeah.
Yeah, and that was the other thing, is that when the side of the music finished, you had to turn it over and
Yeah,
start again
that's right.
on the other side. But I think the other thing that was important, and this brings me on to my next visual here, is that people studied album covers. When you got it home and you were playing it, generally it was a gatefold sleeve, which is 24 inches by 12 inches, a great canvas for any designer to work to, like a painting.
Yeah.
If you studied it, you read the lyrics, you read the credits, you looked at the pictures, you looked at the way it was designed, you looked at the outside, you were looking for threads of what the band were doing and what they were about.
Yeah.
Well, that was great in many cases, but I have to say, in my case with Hipgnosis, we deliberately designed pictures that were very enigmatic and kind of obscure, and actually were often not related at all to title of the album, name of the band, or any of that stuff. All we were interested in was creating good pictures. Good pictures is what sold the record, and that I regard as good packaging.
Yep.
Because nobody was going to change the size of the vinyl.
Yeah, it's a fixed format.
Yeah, it's a set format.
Yeah.
But it's what you put on it that was important, and that I think was something that was, that is missing now in the digital world. We just don't sort of have that anymore. But I just want to touch basically a little bit on the history of album packaging,
Sure.
because it's important.
Yeah.
Now, this is how a classic person would be in the late 70s. He'd have a vast vinyl collection, and you can see how big and cumbersome it is. I mean, here's a guy flicking through his collection. He's probably identified by a very rigorous sort of system of numbering and lettering, so he can pick something out. But this was very typical of people to have large collections like this. Nowadays, it simply doesn't exist. But you can see how much it used to clutter up the home. But let's go and have a look at this. Now, here you've got a classic cartoon, Peanuts, who's looking and saying, I'm real proud of my record collection. Now, that's how record collecting filtrated into what I call the psyche of publishing. Suddenly you have cartoons that are being made. Here's another one, an example of the sort of thing where you see how the album cover is important to people socially. It's not record buying public. It's across the board. So let's talk about where records came from. Well, originally they were made out of shellac. They were very brittle, and the quality of them in the 1950s was something which could only allow you to play for 4 or 5 minutes a side. That was it. And they scratched easily. And when you put the needle on, the needle was about the size of a household nail. It was something that
it was a big needle,
Yeah, and it wasn't a great kind of sound, but it's all that everybody had.
And they loved it. They loved it.
Yeah, and you can see with this packaging here, it's kind of very retrospective. There's something very charming about it and very nostalgic about it, but actually it's not really telling you much about what's inside. Now, that all changed when a guy called Peter Goldmark, who worked for CBS, he discovered how to make an LP, a long playing record. And this was a plastic record that was very flexible that you could put 20 minutes aside on. Well, that required a different kind of packaging. This required something which was a proper cardboard piece. Nothing, not lightweight paper like that. This required something more sort of substantial. The first record that came out was on Columbia Records, and this was the first vinyl, really, and it was art directed by a guy called Alex Steinweiss, and he was a very famous designer anyway, but he had the reputation of being the first designer. He then went on to do the very first popular album cover, which was the voice of Frank Sinatra. I guess most people have heard of Frank Sinatra.
Sure.
He was the biggest crooner in the world that there's ever been. So this
Blue Eyes, old Blue Eyes, yeah.
Yeah, old Blue Eyes. This was a very important piece. But I think what I'm going to run through very quickly is how artists realized that that kind of packaging was being delivered to millions of listeners around the world. And how great was that to get your image on it? And if you've got your image on it, loads of people are going to see your work. It wasn't like a painter who hands his picture in a gallery and a few people see it. This was something where it was going out to billions of people. And that's how it was in those days. So, for example, let's just go through a couple of things. Okay, there was a famous record company, jazz company called Blue Note, and they were very renowned for their abstract and kind of state-of-the-art imagery in the early 60s. And Reed Miles, who did all these pictures here and who was their art designer, was highly recognized as a guy who could put an image on the packaging of the vinyl and make it attractive for people to buy it, because jazz was hard to sell. He succeeded in doing that. This then attracted people like Salvador Dali. Now, I mean, Salvador Dali, one of the greatest surrealists that ever lived, what prompted him to do an album cover for Jackie Gleason, who is an American comedian? Well, I mean, somehow or other, they became best friends. And
it does seem very Dali-esque, though, to do something like that. I mean,
can you imagine Salvador Dali doing an album cover? I mean, why would he need to do that? He did it
because he could.
People would see it.
Yeah. And also, I think there's another thing. It's not just about that people will see it, because yes, it'll get your work in front of a bunch of people, but when they see your work, they'll then hear the music, right? They'll remember. It's a synesthetic thing, right? Where like the visual and the audio kind of mix and intermingle. So now when I see the cover of Nevermind by Nirvana, right? Like the baby in the water, I
Yes,
hear "Smells Like Teen Spirit" in my head. Like,
exactly.
that's
Exactly so.
important, that connection
Exactly.
there.
Yeah. I mean, let's talk about Andy Warhol. I mean,
Mm,
Andy Warhol, he started out as a well, a fashion designer, shoe
yep.
designer. He
Shoe
started,
designer, yeah.
he's, he did an early Blue Note album cover. I mean, you can't really see Andy Warhol's sort of style in there, but what do you see at the bottom? You see his name, Andy
Hmm.
Warhol. He's starting out really early doing designs. And the interesting thing about him is he said something very important. Um, he said, "I like painting on a square because you don't have to decide whether it should be longer or shorter. Shorter or longer is just a square." And if you look at Andy Warhol's paintings later on in his life, which made him very famous, the Jackie Onassis
Hmm.
pictures,
Marilyn Monroe, yeah.
yeah, they're all square.
Yeah,
All
yeah.
come from he did
Interesting.
something like 114 album covers or something like that. So
Wow.
his initial artwork, his initial painting, was governed and influenced by working on album covers. Let's go on to what really happened in the late 60s. It then sort of rock and roll sort of became just something where record companies who had their own in-house departments generally just wanted pictures of a band on the
Yeah,
front. They wanted the text to be big hits, the Rolling Stone and a picture of the band. And nearly every other album cover, if you look at pre-1964, is about that, just
yeah,
pictures of the band, and very uninteresting and incredibly dull. So you move on. Now, this was the sea change. This
yep.
is Sergeant Pepper with the Beatles, and this was done by Peter Blake. Now, Peter Blake was a pop artist. He was an English pop artist, probably on a parallel in Europe with Andy Warhol.
Hmm.
And he decided to create a living sculpture. What he did is he got loads of prints, big prints, life size, of all famous people and put them in his studio and got the Beatles to stand in amongst it, and then created a whole scenario with flowers and everything else and created something really interesting. And it is a sculpture. That's what it is.
Yeah,
And for the first time, really, that a piece of art appeared on an album cover by a famous artist at the time that was going to change the face of how people saw album cover packaging. Hipgnosis, my company, started that same year. And we realized when we saw his work that we too could put anything on an album cover, basically, as long as it was appealing in a way that the fan would expect and the band would expect, but it had to be an asset visually that was something interesting to buy. And take my hat off to Peter Blake. He really
yeah,
started. We then go on to Andy Warhol again. Now, by this time, he's become a very famous pop artist. And we're looking at 1967 and the Velvet Underground, and he puts a picture of a banana on, which you could peel off. And
yeah.
underneath the pink banana has all sorts of sexualized connotations, but nevertheless, with Andy Warhol. Again, he's got his name big at the bottom. Here we are, Andy Warhol again, the Rolling Stones, Sticky
Such
Fingers.
a classic, such a classic album.
Not just a classic, but it's very provocative. Look at
Yeah,
this. This is classic Andy Warhol art.
Factory, yeah,
Yeah, factory stuff. He's
yeah,
got one of his assistants in there wearing a tight pair of jeans and a zipper. But the difference was that he insisted with the album jacket, the packaging should have a real zipper. That is an actual zipper.
yeah,
Now, that created chaos because actually, when the records were packaged to be sent out to dealers all over the world, it actually damaged the record. They had to recall it, and they had to take the zippers off, and they had to put it on as a photograph. But nevertheless, you've got the interest of a serious pop artist to get involved and create a three-dimensional package for an album cover.
You know,
This
something else.
does
Sorry.
become really important, you know.
Yeah, and I think something else that occurs to me is that you were mentioning that before this time, record companies just wanted the band on it, right? They wanted to picture them, like they're selling the personalities in the band. And I think with the Stones, for example, they're selling like sex in a way because they were
Yeah,
young, but here is like Warhol also selling sex, right?
yeah.
It's sexual. It's like it's very masculine, and he's doing it, but he's not doing it by referencing the band at all. Like the Rolling
No,
Stones are
no,
not in here. I mean, that could be Mick Jagger, but it could also be Paul America, right, from the Factory. So it's like,
that's exactly right.
which is who it probably is, but I'm guessing. But anyway, like he
The
found a
titles,
way. Yeah, he found a way to
titles
sell
provocative,
sex.
sticky fingers. I mean, what's
Yeah,
this? You know, it's kind
it's
of got a,
incredible. It's
yeah,
incredible. It really is. Like if you think about, and you can see the divergence from the music, and then the art is kind of finding its own direction at this time, which is really interesting.
that's exactly right. And
Yeah.
at this point, it's sort of this is 1971.
Mm.
Uh, the sea change was really in progress, and album covers started to become a piece of art that was associated with the music, not the other way around. Of course, the music was always important. You know, that was the most important thing because these were rock and roll records. But the art began to be recognized as something that people looked at, as I say, since Sergeant Pepper and now Sticky Fingers,
Yeah.
where they wanted to have this on their shelf. They wanted
Yeah.
to have, you know, it's almost like people would, you know, I think that Noel Gallagher from Oasis said, you know, the thing about album covers is they were a poor man's art,
Yeah.
where and rich people had, you know, Van Goghs on the wall. Uh, the
We
normal
have records. Yeah.
had records on the wall, and it's
Yeah.
absolutely true. That became a very important ident for
Mhm.
who you were in your social standing.
Mhm.
But I'm just going to move on very quickly here,
Yeah.
just to show one or two others. I mean, the White Album for the Beatles by
Yeah.
Richard Howard. I mean, how outrageous to have an album cover that had absolutely nothing on it at all except just an indentation of the word the Beatles. You had things like David Bailey, who was a very, very famous English photographer, doing a picture of the Stones, and it's a picture of a distorted Mick Jagger taken through a veil. You've got Patti Smith, Horses, done by Robert Mapplethorpe,
Yeah.
famous American photographers there was. You know, all these people gravitating to work in this field, in this genre, because they knew of the exposure they would get.
Mm.
David Bowie with Keith Haring, you know, Keith Haring was attracted to work with David Bowie as David Bowie was attracted to work with him. It
Of
was one
course. Yeah.
other in the art world, you know.
Yeah.
Moving forward, an English band called Think Tank, which has been done by Banksy, who's this
Yeah.
very graffiti artist. You know, and again, Blur wanting to get in on the act of what was currently the zeitgeist, and that was Banksy. That is Banksy.
Yeah. It is Banksy.
Then
Yeah.
we go to Lady Gaga, and you've got Jeff Koons. Now, Jeff Koons is one of the major sculptors of the world right now. You know, his pieces sell for tens of millions. And here's Lady Gaga, smart enough to employ him to get involved with her, and vice versa. Lady Gaga's at the top of the tree, Jeff Koons at the top of the tree. One hand is washing the other. Art meets art. And it's all down to the packaging of the vinyl.
Mm.
You know, so this is a sort of brings me on to the fact of vinyl album covers. What makes them so important? Well, designers became important. People like myself, for Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, Paul McCartney, yes, I did many covers for those people.
Yeah.
And I became like what I call the fifth wheel on the car. I went everywhere the band went. If they went on tour, I went on tour. If they were staying in the Plaza Hotel in New York, so was I. I set up a studio in the Plaza Hotel in New York for Led Zeppelin once for 3 months in order to work with them. You know, you became an important part of the band. And I have to say that those relationships run through to this day, which is why I'm still the creative director for Pink Floyd. But I think the other thing is that one has to remember that the social activity that we have today, with the advent of the digital world and computers, is far, far removed from the days of what I would call steam radio. Steam radio in the 1970s, of course, didn't exist, but it was a very backward world compared to what we have now. And, you know, as I said before, there were so few ways to access information about your favorite artist for the record. So in a way, the album cover became an essential part of the packaging and became almost an essential asset to the band, as I've said that before, because the more interesting an image you had on the album cover, the more attracted people were to find out about you. I think the other thing is that in the 1970s, the record business was awash with money. Vinyl sold in tens of millions.
Yeah.
You know, as I say, Stevie Wonder sold 22 million albums. Peter Frampton will sell 14 million albums. Pink Floyd will sell 50 million albums. You know, there was so much money sloshing around that when, as an artist, you went to the band, and I never worked for the record companies, by the way, always for the band, and you had some outrageous idea, you know, I want to shoot a sheep on a psychiatrist's couch. Or where do you want to do it? I suppose in the coastal seaside of England. No, I want to go to Hawaii with some big waves. Oh, okay, well, you better go. It was like that. Nobody said no. And so that was a privilege, actually. But it did allow Hipgnosis to do some extraordinary covers just because we could. Now, who were Hipgnosis? Hipgnosis were three people. There's Peter Christopherson on the left, who had a very underground band, who invented kind of industrial music called Throbbing Gristle. He was the youngest. There's myself in the center there, looking kind of weird with long hair. And Storm Thorgerson on the right. I was predominantly the photographer. Storm was predominantly the ideas man. And Peter fell somewhere in the middle. It was quite a volatile relationship because we used to argue till the ends of the earth about a picture to get the right idea and to get the right image exactly. Whether it was composition, whether it was, you know, whether it was about the idea, whether it was what we liked as opposed to what the artist might like. All of those things were very important to all of us. And at the end of the day, that care and attention and that diligence to the picture paid off because we always, I think, with the best, you know. And I think the other thing is that one's got to remember that it was also, as much as we were creating what we would consider to be fine art, we were running a studio. Money. This wasn't something whereby this was some indulgent activity where we were living in a garret at the top of a room in Paris, you know, painting with money. We had assistants to pay. We had darkroom assistants to pay. We had retouchers to pay. We had all kinds of people that worked for us, people who did graphics, you know. So sometimes you work for money, like we worked in advertising sometimes. And sometimes we worked for nothing, for people who did not afford us because we wanted to get an idea out there and we believed in the idea. I remember once Robert Plant from Led Zeppelin, I went to talk to him about an idea for Led Zeppelin, and I had it scribbled on a piece of white card. And I showed it to him, and he said, "Oh, I like that." And then he turned it over, and on the back, crossed out, was Wishbone Ash, Uriah Heep, AC/DC, Paul McCartney, and he looked at me and he said, "Have you tried to sell this idea to all these people?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, you're like a second-hand car dealer." I said, "No, I'm not. It's a really good idea, and somebody's going to buy it. And all I'm interested in is to get my good idea out into the public domain." Simple as that. Anyway, we didn't get the job. Didn't always work. But it's a kind of example of how it was. Was not all about the art per se, but it was important for us to. It didn't matter really to us who bought the art. It was just
Yeah.
important we got the art out in the public space.
Interesting.
So, which probably brings me on to, or back to, Dark Side of the Moon. Now, this was not really our style. And when I went to see Pink Floyd at Abbey Road Studios, they said, "We're a bit fed up with your sort of surreal designs. Can't we have something more in lines of a sort of a simple graphic image?" I was thumbing through a science textbook one day, which was about the law of physics and physics of light. And Storm said to me, "I've got it." He said, "I've got a pyramid with a white line going up to it, creating a rainbow effect." And why that was so interesting is because it represented Pink Floyd's stage show at the time. They were very dark and gloomy, and often they stood with their backs to the audience. And what they did have was the first sort of mechanical electric theatre, as Roger Waters liked to call it, which was lights on cranes, industrial cranes that moved around like this during the concert. They had a big circular screen on stage that showed films throughout. They had dry ice falling into the audience all the time. And those concerts in those days were like a classical concert. People all sat on the, and you could have heard a pin drop. There was no cheering, shouting, moving, throwing bottles. There was none of that. It was a lot of reverence given to it. And I think they felt that this design represented them to a T at that moment in time, which is why they liked it. So we were lucky,
Yeah.
But that album, because it sold 65 million, changed the fortunes of Hipgnosis overnight. Suddenly we were the go-to studio. And for the next 10 years, we didn't stop. It was wonderful.
Wow.
But I'm talking about my projects only because I'm more familiar with them than anything else. And I'm familiar with how these designs have worked in terms of packaging.
Yeah.
And we're talking about packaging after all. So that is how it looked when it was drawn up. And how dull is that? I mean, if I'd shown that to the band, they would have gone, take it away. I don't want to see that. But in reality, that is what the actual artwork looked like, because it had to be an illustration done by an architectural person. It had to be so precise and so correctly done that a printer could understand the information. We wouldn't do it like that now.
Yeah.
Well, you do it completely differently. You could do it in half an hour.
Yeah.
Well, that's the original artwork. You give it to the printer and you say, follow those instructions. I mean, pretty dull looking, isn't it? But anyway,
but I think this is important though, because this step is often skipped now. Like I'll really push my students to sketch before we even go on the computer. You gotta sketch stuff, right? You have to do diagrams. You have to work it out. This is more than just instructions for the printer. This is thinking out an idea. It's like recording your thoughts in a way, and the thinking process, right? That's what sketching is so powerful for. So I think it's really important to you could say this is rubbish, and the band would have balked at it, but I feel like I'm really drawn in by it, and I can see the thinking process.
Don't say the band to say it rubbish, actually. The band wouldn't understand it. Because to the layman, it just looks like a bunch of kind of architectural drawings. but
Right.
actually, for those of us who understood it, it meant something else. The
Yeah.
band wouldn't have expected to understood that in a million years. But I think more to the point is what you've just mentioned is the art of sketching something out.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm very familiar with the digital world these days, and I work in it all the time, every day, because that's what's required. You know, I don't load film into a camera anymore and take it down to the darkroom and process it and then blow up lots of prints.
Yeah.
That's what we did in those days. Nowadays, I pick up my point and shoot digital camera, bang, and I've got an instant picture with millions of pixels that I can create something fabulous in the studio afterwards, you know, on Photoshop.
Yeah.
But still, before I do anything, I'm sketching out the idea. You know, wouldn't this be interesting to have this over here and the composition of that there and okay, well, so we need to shoot this and that and the other. We're going to make a collage in the computer. Well, this still has to be done in the same way. But the initial sketching, the initial idea, the germ, the thought of it, this is absolutely essential to have it sort of as a rough. And you can't really do that on a computer. You know, I have a sketchbook that I'm always scribbling in, you know, and that is still part of the emotional contact.
Yeah.
What you're doing in the initial idea and then transporting it into a digital world. That's essential to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, let's just have a look. Okay, now here's something interesting. So Dark Side of the Moon, it comes out on an album cover, but then it gets transposed politically. Here we have a bunch of insurgents who are part of the Syrian revolution happening a few years ago against Assad. And they've created their own version of Dark Side of the Moon. It's showing this white line going to an image of Syria, and it's about freeing Syria from oppression. Now, I've seen dozens of these examples all over the place of taking Dark Side of the Moon and using it for some sort of political gain. But what's interesting is it's even infiltrated into the tribes of northern Syria to design a picture like this. And you know, I'm very flattered about that they're using it as a protest movement. You know, so what you design, and I'd say this to any student, what you design now, if it becomes an important element in some way that you're connected with, it can be used in years to come in some way completely different. The same as music, you know. People get upset when Donald Trump uses a piece of theme music for his rally. You know, they say, I don't want you to use it, but they can't stop him, you know, or, you know, that kind of thing. Or something you've written is used for a talk show or a chat show or something. You know, people get upset about it, but they can't actually stop the music.
No.
You know, and it's the same with art, really. So, just moving on from there. Now, here's an important piece from Hipgnosis. Now, this was designed in 1970 for an album called Atom Heart Mother for Pink Floyd. And Storm and I were sitting around one day and we said, how about doing something which is influenced by the Dadaist movement, which came out of Paris and Germany and Austria, 1920s, 30s. And of course, the leading proponent of that was Marcel Duchamp, who famously entered into an exhibition, Men's Urinal, signed by R. Mutt. And this was typical Dadaist. It was spontaneous, humorous, absurd, and irrational, and was a statement against the horrors of the First World War, of the trench warfare that went on. Still relevant today if you see what's happening in Ukraine. So Storm and I decided to do something that was in that vein, and we were thinking about what was the most sort of mundane thing you could shoot, but not copy Marcel Duchamp. cow in the field. So we jumped in the car, drove outside London. First field we saw with cows in it. Here was Lulubelle III. That was her name. Took a photograph, went back, processed it, took it up to Abbey Road Studios, presented to Pink Floyd. They all went, "That's it. That's great." Only thing is, there's no title of the
Right.
band, no title of the album. There is no information whatsoever. Now, when that went to the record companies, they went apoplectic with rage. They said, "Oh, you know, it doesn't mention that. We'll never sell this." Well, the opposite happened. It went to the top 10 in America. It was the most successful album that the Pink Floyd ever had. And instead of being a non-cover, as I would call it, it became an iconic cover.
Yeah.
Because even in an emporium of 10,000 albums with pictures of bands on, a cow stood out a mile away, and people were curious.
So did you know that was going to happen? Did you have intuition? So let me ask you something.
I wish
And
I
this,
had, but I
yeah,
can't.
right. It's like a magical formula for making a great
Yeah.
album cover, but I don't know if it's repeatable. Maybe it is, but my question is, in terms of like client relations, right? You had to sell this to the band. I can see, the Pink Floyd loving it, right? But a record company, you have to deal with them in a way and have to convince them that this is a good idea, that they should move ahead with it. What do you tell them? Because you don't have any proof that it's going to sell. You don't even know if it is going to work.
Let me explain. When I said that Hipgnosis was like the fifth wheel on a car with the
Yeah,
band, people like Led Zeppelin or Paul McCartney or Genesis or Peter Gabriel or Pink Floyd, they had total creative control over what they did. And we worked
yeah,
for their record company. So when I walked into a record company and said, "This is the artwork," doesn't matter how upset they got, I always said, blame them, blame the
yeah,
band. They accepted it, they want it. Don't blame me.
yeah,
I'm just a purveyor of bad news. And they had to use it because the bands wanted to use it, and they had creative control, completely creative control. So and Hipgnosis was always supported by them. I
yeah.
remember Led Zeppelin when I did a black object for them on a cover with a
Yep.
family sitting around the
Coda.
table.
Yeah, Coda.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it was actually a presence. When I
Presence. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
remember the record company saying, "What's this got to do with rock and roll?" I said, "Absolutely nothing." It's just a great picture. That's what it's all about. It's about creating a great picture that's satisfying to you, and you hope it satisfies other people and begs for their curiosity, that
You,
their intelligence is going to go, "What's that all about?"
it's interesting because I feel like that's gone too. Like we were talking about how, the album itself is gone and album artwork went with it. But I also think that like that control over one's art and the ability to not have to make apologies for it, that's kind of
Yeah.
missing too, right? Like you can't, I don't think like I could go to a client with some idea that speaks to me and say, well, I think it speaks to your, whomever, your audience, and just expect them to go along with it. Like I just never had that kind of control here in the 21st century. So
No, it's absolutely true. I mean, I'm very fortunate in that the people that I work for now, still like Paul McCartney or like Pink Floyd and people like that, is that they have such creative control. They can do
yeah,
what they like. But it's true to say it's some up and coming young band who's trying to break through. There are so many obstacles in front of them with record companies, lawyers, accountants, no
yeah,
money to sort of, to promote them well because it isn't there anymore. I mean, you can blame Spotify and all these things about not paying enough royalties to the record
yeah,
company.
yeah.
Nevertheless, there are a lot of problems that exist now
Mm,
financially that did not exist in the 1970s. And I think that has a lot to do with it. There's
yeah,
very little support for a new band financially. And so album covers, as I say, they're now the size of a thumbnail,
Yeah.
are least of their problems, and they're way down the list, and you know, I mean, record covers from let's say 67 to 1982. This was the halcyon days. This was the
Yeah.
salad of record cover design, and they're never going to return, regardless
Yeah.
of the revival of interest in vinyl. That's never
Yeah.
going to.
Yeah.
We're moving on. We're moving into an AI world now.
Yeah.
Embrace it or not embrace it, whatever. We're moving forward very rapidly into a world, and maybe still pictures will become important to music again in some other form. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not clairvoyant about that, but
Uh-huh.
we had the best of it, I think, to be honest.
Yeah. I agree.
Now, I'm not running out of time because I've gone over what I'm talking about. So I'm going forward, and I'm going to have to spin forward here. So
Yeah,
back
sure.
to this.
Sex Pistols.
Yeah. What formed the demise of the album cover as a large, pretentious event that you could do anything? Well, it was the advent of punk in 1976. The Sex Pistols arrived on the scene, and they happened to have the studio behind Hipgnosis Studios. And I always remember we were super polite to each other, really cool. But we were like the old dinosaurs coming out of the long hair and the rock of ages,
Yeah.
and they were young punks. And I remember seeing Johnny Rotten wearing a T-shirt saying, "I hate Pink Floyd." And I said, "What's that, John? Why are you wearing that?" And he said, "I do hate them." He said, "Their music's rubbish." And he said, "We're new, so get out the way." And he was absolutely right. But what happened with album covers, whereas we were used to getting, say, $50,000 to create an album cover in the late 70s, Jamie Reed, who did Never Mind the Bollocks, Here's the Sex Pistols, created a cover which probably cost $5.
Yep.
It's just cut out bits of newspaper and painted on bits of lettering
Yeah.
on no background, nothing at all.
Yeah.
And that became the staple for punk. And the punk movement, thank God, I support it completely, changed the
Yeah.
world.
Yeah.
Knocked the world on its head. And suddenly, huge budgets for album covers were out the window. People wanted simplicity. People wanted anger. There were a lot of angst going on about politically, how people were being disenfranchised around the world, just not,
Yeah.
in America, in England, in Europe, there was a lot of
Yeah.
sort of protest amongst the youth, and punk was the way of showing it and displaying
Sure.
it. I fully supported it, but it marked the end of the line for album covers. And by 1982,
Mhm.
people were not taking so much notice of them. And also, as you mentioned earlier, CDs came in.
Yeah.
And they're only that big, and I
Yeah.
wasn't interested really with Storm to make pictures that were going out that big. But there was a new motivation in town, which was MTV. And MTV was music videos, and that was an obvious place for us to go. So we stopped doing album covers. We absolutely stopped it dead. And people were coming to us still and saying, but you're the guys that did the album covers. We said, no, not anymore. We make films. And we started making music. And all the clients that we had, the Led Zeppelins, the Paul McCartneys, the Pink Floyd, we took them with us and we made
Yeah.
music for them. We just changed the scene.
Yeah.
So we forgot about packaging. It was
Yeah.
done. And I think, this is the classic, I'm afraid to say. It's a warehouse full of destroyed vinyl packaging. And that's what happened to it. Albums didn't sell anymore. It was gone. There was Sony Walkman came along, CDs along. There was all sorts of accessibility. And now, of course, we don't even think about those things. They're obsolete too. But that's what happened. millions and millions of records were destroyed because they were no longer viable for selling to the public.
Yeah.
And as much as that makes me sad, I'm extremely proud to have been a part of what was the greatest period of time for packaging for vinyl.
Yeah,
And it was a privilege as
I
well.
bet. I mean, it's a privilege just talking to you. I remember like I first saw Houses of the Holy in the record store. I must have been like 12 or 13. Hadn't ever heard a Zeppelin song that I could recognize. I didn't become, it was basically like maybe that was right around the time I bought Led Zeppelin 2 and like became the hugest Zeppelin fan and that I could imagine. But before that, I was looking at your work on like Houses of the Holy and thinking like, what is this? Why is there's like nudity, but they're also like in this weird hellscape and the colors are false color. I was just like sold on whatever was in that square, right? And then like of course you hear the album. It's one of the most amazing albums they ever released, right? And the story behind the album is amazing and how it was recorded and the songs are
Yeah,
classic. I mean, the whole experience from soup to nuts was incredible, right? So it's like even though, by the early 80s punk had among other things had killed the album cover with a trash aesthetic and caused a lot of other great things to happen. Um, Even though that happened, I still grew up like seeing these things and identifying them. And I think that like it could, I think you touched on it before. It could still happen, where this sort of like resurgence and a love and the illusion of both music and art could happen again. I hope you're right about that. I've heard you. Yeah, sorry, you were going to say something.
well, I was only going to just pick you up on that
Yeah,
because I just opened a huge retrospective of Hipgnosis art in Seoul, 1,000 square meters and 250 pictures. And I was staggered by the age of the people that came. On the first night's opening, we had 1,000 people came, and I wouldn't say there was a single person over 30. And many of those people had never heard of Led Zeppelin or the music of Paul McCartney. They weren't interested. They were interested in the visuals. And they were absolutely fascinated. And within a week, we had 6,000 visitors. Now, that to me shows that the art,
yeah,
if you create art on packaging, it will stand the test of time.
yeah. I agree.
And that to me, it touches my heart more than anything else that young people
Yeah.
enjoy the pictures that I made 50 years ago.
Absolutely. I have one last question for you. I've heard you say in an interview that before you were famous, before Pink Floyd was famous, you guys were all hanging out
Yeah,
in Cambridge. I think it was Cambridge. You guys had a flat, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
you're all kind of like just chilling. Nobody's famous, but you said that you knew that you could feel like you were part. There was like an undercurrent of a movement that you were part of the hipster movement.
mm,
Um, and I think that that's a very time specific thing that was
yeah.
all wrapped up in what was happening in the late 60s and the revolution, the sexual revolution, the musical revolution, um, the
Fashion, everything.
yeah, everything was sort of suffused with this. But I was wondering, do you feel like here we are, 2024? Do you feel like there are any cultural undercurrents or movements nowadays that you're a part of? Like you mentioned moving into video, so you did seize upon the birth of the music video, which is smart. But what
Yeah,
about today? Is there something similar and that our
yeah.
students might feel a part of as well?
Well, yes. I mean, there's a tremendous amount going on and tremendous amount of interest in what I call immersive experience.
Mm,
And people like ILM, Industrial Light and Magic, are creating these incredible shows. We have this show at the moment in London, which is the ABBA show,
yeah,
uh, ABBA Voyage. And it's a remarkable experience to see. I mean, really something else. Or you go and see the Sphere in Vegas.
yeah, yeah,
Uh, You know, we're moving into another dimension of accessibility to visuals that we had previously that we can now reconstitute and make
yeah,
something else.
yeah,
Not only that, but new visuals too. And I think that the possibilities that are coming up very quickly in technology are just going to be amazing. I mean, we will definitely soon have holograms. Soon,
Oh yeah.
have in my sitting room somebody sitting in that chair and it's a hologram and they look as real as you and me.
Yeah.
It will happen just because the technology is now there. It's not developed completely, but it will be.
Yeah.
And so all of that I embrace. I mean, one day it'll be like Star Trek. You'll pick up something that'll be related to music, and it'll be something which is three-dimensional and kind of invisible in your hand, and yet you can see a picture and you'll hold it like some sort of magic crystal ball.
Yeah.
It's gonna happen.
Yeah.
You know, just a question of time. And I embrace all of that. I embrace technology completely.
Has anyone approached you about the Sphere yet, about doing stuff for the Sphere?
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah, and also I've been about doing an immersive exhibition of Hipgnosis' work, and it would be ideal for that.
Oh
and,
yeah.
But the thing about an immersive exhibition, to make it really good, it's a lot of money. It's very expensive, millions.
Yeah. Yeah,
and that's a whole world that I'm investigating. In fact, I have a meeting with ILM next week.
Okay.
Talking this kind of stuff. So
yeah, we've actually been talking. Lehman College has been talking to the LGBTQ VR museum. They're based. Okay, I mean they're based in London, but it's an LGBTQ museum of like artifacts, performances, interviews, but it's all VR, and like we're gonna like work with students and stuff, and we have to do like volumetric recording, which is very expensive, and it's kind of mind-boggling. But it's also it's an immersive experience. It's very interesting, and it's
it's the way forward. It's the way forward.
Yeah, it really is.
That I welcome.
Well, Aubrey, listen, thank you so much. It's such an honor. I have to tell you, huge honor to talk to you and to meet you and to look at your work and to talk about all of this. Thank you so much for spending time with me and talking. And I hope I can't wait to see what you have next, what you're going to be doing. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me, and it's been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it, and good luck to everybody. And,
thank you.
Work hard is my main mantra.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
All right, folks. So that was that. Thank you so much for coming in and watching that. Again, if you have any, I'm sure questions will arise in the coming days. If you have them, please feel free to email me, email your professor, whomever, and we'll get those in front of Aubrey. Anyway, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for joining me, and thank you for the last 4.5 years. It's been pretty incredible. So I appreciate it. Everybody, please have a good weekend, and hopefully we'll see you soon in some other format. All right, bye-bye now.